This week, you're going to get a break from my voice, and I'm going to ask you to watch a movie called The Searchers. So, just to be clear, there's a reading, there's a couple of chapters from Gwen. When I say a couple, I think there's four. Empire of the Summer Moon. There won't be a podcast. There won't be any lectures. I'm just asking you to watch the movie. So why am I doing this? Well, The Searchers is considered one of the greatest movies ever made in the United States. It was filmed in the mid-50s. It takes place in Texas, but it was filmed in Monument Valley, Utah. I wish Texas looked like Monument Valley, Utah, at least Western Texas, although I do love West Texas. Anyway, so it takes place in Texas, but it's filmed in Utah. And it's a movie that's made by the great director John Ford, and it stars John Wayne. I'm not sure if John Wayne has penetrated the consciousness of especially the younger students in the class. Of course, when I was growing up, he was iconic. I think he's still out there. But anyway, this is his favorite movie. This is the favorite movie that he made during his career. He and John Ford made a bunch of movies together. And this was number one, not only of the John Ford movies that John Wayne made, but just of all his movies. This is a very courageous John Wayne performance because he plays basically a psychotic racist and someone who very well may be a thief. And that is introduced in the very beginning of the movie. He's the brother of one of the characters. He kind of drifts in early in the movie. We don't know where he's been. He was in the Confederate Army, and then after the Civil War ended, he disappeared. Now suddenly he reappears, and he has these unmarked gold pieces, which indicates that they were probably stolen. So the other thing about Wayne in this movie, Ethan, is that he both despises indigenous people, especially Comanche. I don't think it's too much to say that he's racist against them. But at the same time, he's gone to the trouble of understanding them. He knows their religion. He can speak some of the language as well. So a very, very complex character, kind of an anti-hero. You don't really know whether to root for him or to root against him. And the story is the story of Cynthia Ann Parker, which you're reading for this course. And it's the story of the young girl, along with some other folks of her family that were kidnapped outside of what's Dallas in 1836. Cynthia Ann became the wife of an Indian chieftain, and she is returned to the Anglo world, and she eventually dies. So it's kind of a sad trajectory. So what The Searchers is about, it kind of loosely follows the story of Cynthia Ann Parker in the attempts of her uncle to save her. And in this story, John Wayne, he's the uncle of Cynthia Ann Parker, and he represents Cynthia Ann's real uncle, who did search for her for a number of years. So that's why I'm showing it in this class. It's a movie about a very, very famous Texas event, the kidnapping and repatriation, I guess that's the word, of Cynthia Ann Parker back into the Anglo world. And the movie's very interesting in a number of ways, and it's fairly sophisticated for a 1950s movie. One, as I said, you don't know whether to root for John Wayne or if he's a scary figure. You'll see what happens when he first encounters Debbie, and that's in the movie, the Cynthia Ann Parker character is named Debbie. Has she gone over to the Comanche world to such an extent that she's irredeemable and has to be killed, in other words? There's some other things about this movie I want you to keep an eye on. The relationship between Ethan and the young man that he saved, who is his companion, who is, I think, something like 1/8 Cherokee or something like that. John Wayne had saved this young man, Marty, when the character was a baby. There's a backstory there. You don't see it. And you see the relationship growing as time goes on. One of the things also about this movie is that it doesn't portray US soldiers as necessarily heroic. They are heroic at times, but also in the movie, there's an instance of a massacre by US soldiers against Comanche women and children. So it's a sophisticated movie in the sense that certainly the Comanches were a very difficult foe, but there's complexity in this movie because the US Army isn't necessarily the good guys here. They're not necessarily the bad guys, but it's kind of like John Wayne. You don't know whether to root for him or not. So this movie has real complexity in how it looks at the West, and I guess what you would call the taming of the West. There's other little features about this movie that I want you to keep an eye on. Note how John Wayne continues to kill buffalo. There's a scene where he keeps shooting at buffalo. And why does he do that? Even when his companion Marty tries to get him to stop. Keep an eye out for that. Some of the scenes where these 50s movies, one of the things about them is they're long. I wouldn't be surprised if this movie had an intermission when it first came out, if you can imagine such a thing. Movies used to have intermission. So it is a long movie. The scenes where, like in the middle of the movie, where they're back home, you can kind of fast forward through those. Marty's kind of writing a letter, but don't fast forward too much. And especially, I really want you to watch the first 40 minutes very, very carefully. That kind of sets up the story. Also, watch for the character of the Indian maid that is given to Marty and Ethan. In some ways, she's portrayed comically. There's a disturbing scene where she kind of is roughed off by John Wayne and Marty. But ultimately, keep an eye on what happens to her and her relationship with the US Army. There's also a very powerful scene where the John Wayne character, Ethan, comes in and he sees some Anglos that have been captive, who've been made captive by the Comanche, and note his contempt for them because they have crossed over into the Comanche world. This movie doesn't make a big deal out of this, but certainly one of the underlying themes is the women that were kidnapped were with almost without a doubt were sexually assaulted. And does that in John Wayne, the character's Ethan, his view, does that put them into, have they become Indians themselves, and do they deserve any pity? So this movie fits very well into some of the themes that I've been developing in the class. Obviously, also the theme of captivity, not only among Anglos. In this movie, the young woman that's kidnapped is Debbie. The great actress Natalie Wood plays Debbie. But just remember during this period that many Mexican and Tejano kids were kidnapped as well, along with Anglo kids. So you have Anglo and Mexican kids being kidnapped by the Comanche all the way up until the 1880s. So that's another theme that comes out in this movie. And so there's a lot in this movie that it teaches us a lot, I think, about the suppression of the Comanche, the war between the Comanche and Anglos, how bitter it was, how fierce it was. And also, it's just quite, I think, an entertaining movie with one of the great John Wayne performances of all time. And like I say, this movie is almost universally considered within the top 10 or top 15 movies ever made. It's just really beautiful to watch as well. So I hope you enjoy it. You will be quizzed on it next week. So be sure to watch it. If you watch it, believe me, if you watch it carefully, you'll be able to answer the questions on the quiz. It'll be very, very straightforward. So I think most of you will get caught up into it. There's some very, very dramatic scenes. And it's one of the movies that I think is a good way of teaching you about the past, especially in Texas.